Roughly half of Australians say they get their news from social media. In fact, there's a good chance that's how you're watching us right now. But that may be set to change with Facebook's parent company Meta making a decision that could mean videos like this will soon disappear.
Just days ago, Meta posted this seismic update.
In early April, we will deprecate Facebook News, a dedicated tab for news content in the United States and Australia.
The announcement shocked news organisations, as well as the federal government, which wasn't angry, just
very disappointed at this outcome.
Meta has made it very clear they don't want to pay for news anywhere in the world, and it was actually a surprise that they agreed to do so in the first place in Australia. And I think what we're seeing is that they're trying to very much stick the genie back in.
It all began about 3 years ago when the Australian government decided that the ad revenue generated by news stories should actually go to the people who make the news, and not just platforms like Facebook. Meta and Google quickly made deals with news companies before the government could force them. Deals that bring about $200 million to the sector every year. But those deals are about to expire.
They make a lot of money. The idea they should just get free access undermines journalism.
Even if you don't use Facebook for news, or at all, this is still going to affect you because the cash from Meta and Google has helped keep news organisations afloat. The ABC, for example, created 60 positions in regional Australia with the revenue.
Meta and Facebook say news isn't really of particular value to us. We bring real value to news creators because we amplify them. News producers argue you'd have nothing to amplify if we didn't create this really quality content.
If we want a preview of what this could look like, we just need to take a look at Canada. When that government introduced a law requiring internet companies to pay news publishers, Meta responded by blocking all news, right in the middle of the country's worst wildfire season ever.
Instead of making sure that local journalists are fairly paid for keeping Canadians informed on things like wildfires, Facebook is blocking news from its sites.
Australia isn't there yet. We'll still be able to see news for now, but that could well change if, like Canada, Albo decides to force Meta's hand.
The government will look at all the options that are available to us.
So with the government on the verge of war with Meta, could Facebook log out of the news business for good?
Well, to help us make sense of all this, we popped a Fred request through to renowned Australian journo Peter Greste. Hey, Peter, can the government actually force Meta to pay?
Well, it can under the legislation. The agreement was, or the law says that if the big tech giants can't negotiate deals with the news companies, then the government will force them to the table. They'll force them to negotiate agreements. So it looks as though they can actually force them to pony up, but it still, I think, highlights the problem, and that's what happens when you treat news as a commodity to be bought and sold.
You can't force them to pay for news, though, if they decide not to use it on their website, right? So that's ultimately Facebook's move here.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, they can adopt a ban, but Facebook has said that they're not going to ban it. They're not going to stop people from posting news. It's a really difficult thing because Facebook isn't necessarily proactively going out searching for news stories and then putting it on their website. If users want to do it, then Facebook isn't going to stop them from doing it. And I think that's the grey area which we're going to see quite a lot of arguing over.
So while it might be true what Facebook's saying, that most people on Facebook don't want to use it for news, it is conversely true that still a lot of people get their news via Facebook. Those two things can be true at the same time. So what do you think the long-run effect is on society if people can no longer get news that way?
Well, the fact is that you can't take $70 million out of the Australian news environment without it having a pretty devastating impact. And if Google follows, then that'll be something closer to $250 million a year. And that will have a massive impact on regional journalism, on a lot of investigative journalism right across the country. And that ultimately degrades the quality of the news and information that we're getting. It's hard enough for news organisations to survive as it is. When the News Media Bargaining Code was announced, this was seen as a lifeline to our news industry, and it has helped. It hasn't solved the problem. But I always felt at the time that it was a huge gamble to make our news organisations beholden to the commercial interests of a tech giant whose main interest is maximising shareholder profits for people living in California and not for Australian consumers and the Australian democracy.
So, Peter, we've talked through the problem. What's the solution from your point of view? Is there one?
Look, I think there is, but it's a very difficult conversation that we have to have, and perhaps a slightly radical one. It seems to me that if we all acknowledge that we need public interest journalism, even if we don't all consume it to the same extent, the fact is that we need this for the health of our democracy. And so I think we need to consider finding some way of drawing from public funds, not from the government funds, but perhaps a levy in the way that we pay for Medicare, that everyone pitches in for, and that is used to underwrite good journalism that's produced to a certain set of standards, that covers the kinds of stories that are undercovered at the moment. That, I think, might help us get there. It's not the only solution, but that's the kind of creative thinking that I think we need.
Good luck with getting any politician to adopt that policy.
Yeah, well, look, I know it's unpalatable, but sometimes we've got to have these debates, and I think this gives us an opportunity.
What about this for a solution, Peter? We get the government to legislate that everyone has to watch The Project 6:30 p.m. Sunday to Friday. I forgot what days it was on air, but what do you think about that?
Yeah, well, if you're struggling to get people to pony up for Rupert Murdoch, then I think The Project might have a hell of an argument on its hands as well.
Hey, Peter, thank you so much for your time.
Not a problem.